On June 1st, 2006, Beverly Garret, Beulah Hunter, Eloise Jeans, and Anita Gibbs were driving in a Ford 500 on Interstate 70 in Callaway County, Missouri, to a 50th wedding anniversary celebration in Illinois. The traffic was stopped for a clearing of an earlier traffic accident that day, approximately 30 miles east of Columbia, Missouri. The Missouri Department of Transportation had danger signs and a flagman posted everywhere, miles before the traffic congestion, leading up to the wreck, warning traffic of this major congestion. George Albright, driving a 70,000-pound tractor-trailer back to Tennessee, fell asleep at the wheel and did not see all the warning signs, slamming into this stopped line of cars, scattering them like bowling pins, killing Beverly, Beulah, Eloise, and Anita instantly. According to Albright's initial statements, he said he arrived in Columbia, Missouri at approximately 6 a.m. and had slept for 10 hours and 45 minutes before starting his trip back home. Albright and his company officials adamantly denied that fatigue played any role in the wreck. Of course, a gaping hole remained in terms of his explanation. How could someone drive a 70,000-pound tractor-trailer into stopped traffic if he wasn't asleep at the wheel? Eyewitnesses provided statements to the police indicating that they saw Albright nodding off at the wheel just a couple of miles prior to the crash site. Yet all of the defendants maintained Albright was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, wide awake. Thanks to modern technology, Albright's cell phone records clearly showed that he was in St. Louis, Missouri, approximately 3 hours east of Columbia at 6:50 a.m. on the date of the wreck, and that Albright had falsified and lied in his logbooks. When confronted with his cell phone records, Albright admitted he had lied, he had falsified his logs, and he didn't take the 10 hours rest required by federal regulations. Additionally, in court, it was discovered that approximately 1/3 of Albright's logs were missing from the 6 months leading up to the date of the wreck. Obviously, nobody was monitoring this driver, and more importantly, no one was taking responsibility for his actions. Ken McLean and Danny Thomas, partners at the law firm of Humphreys, Farrington, and McLean, who represented the victims, used 3 criteria when analyzing catastrophic accident cases like these. 1, is there liability? Check. 2, are there damages? Check. 3, do you have a defendant with an ability to pay? Problem. All too often, one of these pieces is missing. In this case, liability and damages were obvious. This was a horrific wreck that took the lives of some wonderful human beings. However, early discovery responses revealed there was barely any insurance to compensate all the victims. Undeterred, Ken and Danny made a conscious decision that this wreck was too horrific and the negligence too gross to advise their clients to accept the paltry insurance proceeds. But there was a real big problem. Initially, no one knew who the trucking company was at first. The Department of Transportation number came back to a company called Pro Logistics of Warren, Michigan. The owner of the vehicle was a company called GLS Leaseco, also of Warren, Michigan. More confusing, the vehicle registration came back to another entity called Logistics Services. Through Humphrey, Farrington, and McLean's investigative research, all of these companies amazingly were headquartered out of the same building, 12225 Stevens Road. Additionally, it was also revealed there were several other companies that had a role in this trucking operation. Logistics Insight and Central Transport, both of which were also headquartered out of 12225 Stevens Road. Through extensive investigative work and over 60 depositions, it was discovered that all of these companies were owned by a single holding company, Centra Inc., and they all operated out of the same building at the time of the wreck. In fact, Centra owned approximately 50 subsidiary companies, most of which operated out of this same building. The corporate overlap amongst these companies was astonishing. It was a major corporate shell game designed to deceive the public into thinking they had no assets. Companies like GLS were true shell corporations. Though GLS officially owned thousands of tractor trailers, it didn't have a single employee. Who the heck was running this multi-million-dollar company? Today, the Insider Exclusive presents Truck Death, the James Garret story, and how Ken McLean and Danny Thomas of the law firm of Humphreys, Farrington, and McLean unraveled this corporate shell game and got justice for these innocent victims, reaching an $18 million settlement. And in so doing, have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best plaintiff trial lawyers in Missouri and in the nation. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Independence, Missouri at the law firm of Humphrey, Farrington, and McLean. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ken McLean and Danny Thomas to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you, Steve.
We are going to be talking about a case which is kind of an unusual case. It appears on the surface it's a trucking accident, you know, a trailer truck accident, that sort of thing. But lo and behold, when you get to the bottom of things, your lead detectives discovered a whole array of deceit, corporate shell game, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it was very admirable and remarkable that you were able to discover that. Your firm primarily represents plaintiffs who are suing corporate America because of wrongs that have been done to them. And you handle a lot of trucking cases, don't you, Ken?
Yes, we do, and we handle them all over the country.
And it isn't limited to just any type of case. There are certain ways to handle these kind of cases that other lawyers don't know how to do. Is that right?
Yes, one of the things that you mentioned is the nature of the trucking business today, in that companies have figured out that if in fact they will incorporate their various departments and insure them for the federally mandated minimum of $1 million per accident, that they can shield all of the assets of the bigger company,
right,
behind a corporate holding company. And that's what happened in the case that you're referring to, is that they divided up their company, the departments of their company, into separate departments so that they could hold all of the money from their trucking operation in a holding company, and they thought shield it from the reach of anyone that they injured.
Right.
That's a big problem, and that presents a real problem for other lawyers in that they believe in this facade, that they believe that these are separate companies, and they treat them as such, and they accept then low settlements for tragically injured people, when in fact the company gained a tremendous amount from the reckless nature in which they operate.
Right, and this is, a lot of lawyers are not aware that they can go beyond that $1 million policy. Isn't that right, Danny?
That's absolutely true.
You got to do your homework.
You got to do your homework, and you know, we get calls like this. We get calls all the time, and Ken and I speak all over the country to other lawyers on how to do what we've done in Garret and other cases, and we get calls from other lawyers who give us the same story. Oh, there's only $1 million in coverage. I've got 3 fatalities, 5 fatalities, permanent injuries.
Yeah.
And you can preach until you're blue in the face that you cannot let these companies get off by undercapitalizing the companies or by underinsuring the trucks.
Right.
You've got to go deeper, and that's what we do.
Let's talk specifically about this case. Tell us the facts that were involved.
June 1st, 2006, at approximately 5:40 p.m., there's a traffic jam on I-70 just a couple miles east of Columbia, Missouri. Missouri Department of Transportation had put up some warnings, warning traffic that there was going to be some congestion up ahead because of some work that was being done. George Albright was operating his tractor trailer. I think he was at about 72,000 pounds that day, so he was almost fully loaded. And for whatever reason, he's not paying attention to the warnings. He's tired. We later learned he'd falsified his logs. He didn't have the right amount of sleep. He's taking 9 or 10 prescription medications, many of which cause drowsiness. And essentially, George Albright fell asleep behind the wheel. He ran into stop traffic at about 70 miles an hour, hit 7 vehicles, excuse me, and in the case of our clients, he killed 4 women.
And those women were, I understand, on their way to a wedding celebration, anniversary?
Anniversary celebration, a 50th anniversary celebration.
Okay. Now, what did you discover when you were investigating this case initially?
Well, initially there was a lot to discover. One, we had to figure out. I think the first thing an attorney has to do when you get a case like this is understand how it happened. It's never just an accident. You have to retrace the steps of the driver. What was he doing? Why wasn't he paying attention?
Right.
And in this case, we had learned that George Albright had falsified his logs. He'd been violating the hours of service.
Now, how did you find this out?
We subpoenaed his cell phone records.
Okay.
His logbooks claimed that he got to Columbia, Missouri at, I believe, 6 a.m. And
Coming from where?
Coming from Tennessee, Smyrna, Tennessee.
Okay.
And he claimed that, according to his logbooks, he got to Columbia at 6 a.m. and slept from 6 a.m. to about 4:45 p.m. Well, when we subpoenaed his cell phone records, we had learned that that was impossible because at 6:45 a.m. he was making calls from St. Louis, Missouri about
Sleep talking.
sleep talking. That's exactly right.
From a place that he wasn't.
Oh, okay. So you were able to pinpoint that he wasn't where he said he was
Where he
supposed to
wasn't,
be?
and so and let me brag on Danny a little bit. When Danny presented him that record in the deposition after he confirmed that he in fact was sleeping in Columbia, Missouri, and Danny demonstrated he was talking at that time from St. Louis, Missouri, his only response was, "Damn."
Yeah,
So-
we have the video deposition, which we'll go to right now, which shows that.
At 6 a.m. you stopped and went to sleep. Is that right?
I was in Columbia at 6 a.m.
You arrived in Columbia, Missouri at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
on June 1st, 2006.
Right.
And you slept from 6 a.m. until 4:45 p.m. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So you slept for 10 hours and 45 minutes?
Yes.
The whole time?
Yes.
You have a cell phone, sir?
Yes.
Before I move on to your cell phone, I want to ask you, are you 100% certain that that log on June 1st, 2006 is accurate?
Yeah, I was in sleep all that day.
You didn't falsify it in any way?
No,
All right. And you've told me the truth today, correct?
correct.
All right. First call you made on the morning of June 1st, 2006, at 5:47 a.m., you called Washington, Illinois. Is that accurate?
That's what it shows. I don't know why I would have been calling Washington, Illinois.
Excuse me, you were calling from Washington, Illinois to a toll-free number.
Oh, okay.
See, it says the origination is from Washington, Illinois,
Yeah.
and it says you were calling a toll-free number.
Oh, okay. I was calling dispatch to tell them that I was there and I was fixing to go to bed.
So you were in Washington, Illinois at 5:47 a.m., correct?
Well, wait a minute. That can't be right.
You know where Washington, Illinois is, sir?
No, I'm drawing a blank on that.
It's east of St. Louis and at least 3 hours from Columbia.
Now he admits he perjured himself, right?
He did.
In a deposition.
He said during the deposition, I think 5 or 6 times, and technique I have to admit I learned from Ken, is give them a chance to correct their testimony a few times. And in this case, I gave him multiple chances.
Yeah, because they can re-emphasize the lie.
Well, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
And he said it 6 times, I counted them, that I'd slept 10 hours. And just like Ken said, I showed him his cell phone and I said, how can you be asleep for 6 hours when at 6:45 you're in St. Louis?
Now, after he admits that he lies, right? Then you run it. So he lies. You have another problem. How are you going to recover for the victims? And before we even get to that, let's talk about those victims for a minute. Who were these 4 women?
Well, the 4 women were members of the same family. Beverly Garret was the daughter of Beulah Hunter. Beverly was driving the vehicle. Alois Jeans was the sister of Beulah Hunter, and the other victim of the car in the vehicle's case is still pending is Anita Gibbs, who was riding, and she was another relative of the other 3 women in the car. They were all riding together, a very joyous family event on their way to this 50th wedding anniversary of a relative in Indiana. So they were on their way to a joyous reunion.
And they're just
in a
sitting
family.
ducks at this intersection.
It was they had left essentially Kansas City, together with another vehicle that of family members, and they were caravanning. And there had been an earlier accident on the road that day, and so they had pulled off into a rest area because they didn't want to get stuck in the traffic below. They had a picnic lunch that they all shared together and just were enjoying the time that they were together as family, looking out on this scene of the slow traffic, trying to figure a way around the traffic jam, couldn't figure it out, and went back on the highway into this essentially stopped traffic. And just as they came onto the road, the truck hit them. And it was such a tragic situation that had they waited 5 minutes, if they'd waited 5 minutes, they would not have been involved in that event. Someone else would have. But it was such a freak situation that they had pulled off just before this occurred, and only pulled back on as he came barreling down the road.
Now, whenever your law firm takes on a case of this horrific proportions, some of the things you look at, the three things you look at are, number one, is there liability, right? And number two, are there damages? And clearly there were in this case, right? And then number three, is there a defendant with the ability to pay, some insurance policy, which leads us into the more important part of this case, as we talked about before. It turned out, and you can tell the story, that this one company, Sentra,
Yes.
actually controlled how many companies?
50 total, and relative to this case, it controlled 7 or 8 companies that were involved one way or the other.
All headquartered at the same place?
All headquartered at the same place. One rented the trucks, one dispatched the drivers,
Right.
one handled the logistics, one handled the tractors, one handled the trailers. You can imagine how many different ways you can parcel out the various functions.
There's a reason why they were all divided up like this. What was the reason?
The reason was to
deceive.
To deceive, yes, to limit the liability of the company.
Is this something that's going on in the trucking industry today?
It's going on in so many different industries,
Right.
but yes, the trucking industry particularly have hit upon this strategy. It was interesting, Steve. The people that we deposed who allegedly worked for one company didn't know which company they worked for.
Well,
they sat next to each other. Yeah, they sat next to each other in the same building.
Yeah.
One working for one company, one working for the other, and we discovered that they didn't know who they worked for. So that was one of the strategies that was successful in demonstrating that this was all one company,
Really?
and why we were allowed to proceed against the.
Now, are there laws
companies.
against this kind of a thing?
Well, laws are.
I mean, that's fraudulent in a way, isn't it?
It certainly is deceptive.
What is the Department of Transportation? You're required to have, what, a minimum of $1 million?
750.
$750,000.
Yes.
Is that per truck, per company, what?
Well, it's per occurrence
Okay.
of injury, and so and there are complicated insurance rules about how many policies will be available for any particular incident, and they try to maximize the number of companies that are under one policy so they can pay as little as possible and
Let me
force
ask you this question.
a plaintiff to settle.
The policy, is it with the policies, because they had multiple, are they with the same company?
Generally, they are with.
So the
same
insurance
company.
company is aware of the game.
Well, there's something unique about this case.
Okay.
In this case, the insurance company was also owned by Sentra.
So they were self-insured, kind of.
Well, no, they were a real insurance company.
Okay.
But they own. But in order to have control of all aspects,
Yeah.
they even took the insurance function in house.
Now, I understand you took, what, 60 depositions approximately?
Yes.
To get to the bottom of this?
Yes.
When were they aware, the other side, Sentra, which is the main company, right? When were they aware that you were on to their game?
Well, I think that the linchpin came when I took the depositions of the various CFOs of these shell companies.
Right.
That is to say, each of the shell companies did have a different CFO.
So they had 50 of them.
Well, I don't know whether they had 50 of them, but in the case that I was involved, they had 3 or 4 different people as the head of finance for those companies. But as I deposed them and disclosed because this was a privately held company, it was very difficult to get these and piece these records together. But as an undergraduate college student, I had a lot of accounting, and so I was able to see very clearly from the documents that were produced that in fact they were shipping all the profit from these companies through a series of transactions which I could detect no economic value to, from one company to another to be paid up to the parent. And as I began to question these CFOs about it, it was very clear that yes, it was true that they were directed to send this money to the parent company, and they didn't like it.
They didn't like it.
They didn't like it.
They had ethical problems.
They had ethical problems with it. There was
Okay.
no economic reason why they should be stripping all of the cash out of these operating companies and send it to the parent holding company, except for the fact that they wanted to be sure that there was no cash available if they killed or injured someone. And that
Did
was
they
very
ever
clear.
say that in the deposition?
They never said that because they were still in the
Employees.
main working for the companies, but it was clear from their body language and from their answers that everyone was uncomfortable with what they had been directed to do.
Right. You went to trial with this.
Yes.
You've got this information.
Yes.
They know you've got the information.
That's right.
But still they're going to trial.
It's the same issue that we address all the time. We were trying a case in a place where they'd never had a big verdict.
Right.
And they repeated that mantra to us over and over again.
When do they repeat it to you? What do you mean? They actually say to you?
They say, we don't care what the facts are. There's never been a verdict that
These
high
are-
in X city.
These are lawyers that are swore to uphold the law, swore to uphold justice, are saying to you, we don't care what the facts are.
Well, these are defense lawyers, so number
It
one.
doesn't make any difference.
And
They're still
defending
ethical
these,
people.
They defend these companies,
Yeah.
and they pay as little as possible to resolve your claim.
Yeah.
So yes, at an ethical or moral level,
Yeah.
that you may have a problem with it, but from their standpoint, they believe they're serving their clients, and you've got to understand that.
Yeah.
That there's no ethics involved here. There's no morals involved. It's a matter of brute force.
Yeah.
And so the question is, can you beat them into submission
Yeah.
through trying the case and demonstrating that people in this jurisdiction you're talking about are humans with compassion,
Yeah.
and they understand the value of human life?
Now, they thought that since there had never been a verdict, and you eventually got a verdict of what?
We got a verdict of $15 million,
Right.
which was the largest verdict ever in that courthouse in a personal injury case. And they ultimately settled for $18 million to keep us from seeking punitive damages.
Okay.
We had in discussions with the jury afterwards, the jury was going to give us a whole lot more than the $3 million in punitive damages that we asked for. But because of appeal issues and the fact that we thought it was less likely to hold it on appeal, we made the settlement on behalf of the client.
We fortunately have with us today James Garret, who is the son of one of the deceased.
Yes.
And we're going to bring him on right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce James Garret to the show. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you.
Your mom was one of the victims in this accident.
Yes, she was.
Tell us a little bit about your mom.
She was real active in the community, very active with my family. I've got 5 kids, 4 daughters, one son, and so she was the consummate grandmother, as well as she was a very able help to me through college, through everything, so through work. So
She was kind of your inspiration.
a lot of inspiration, a lot of. She was a counselor. She was just everything.
Yeah. You today are a fire chief
Yes, I'm a battalion chief
in Kansas City.
in Kansas City, Missouri. Yes,
So you see a lot of accidents, don't you?
see a lot of accidents. See a lot of just turmoil through different disasters.
Yeah. You would think that seeing all these things, it would make you kind of jaded to anything. But this particular accident really hit home, didn't it?
It did. Yes.
You know, the interesting thing, when I started reading about this case, it was more than a catastrophic injury case with 4 people that ended up being deceased. It was the fact that his law firm was able to uncover this corporate shell game where, had they not done this, other lawyers who might have represented you would have accepted a settlement of far less than what it was worth, correct?
Yeah, I think that was one of the main issues when James called me. He was being told by these lawyers that all there was $1 million worth of insurance coverage. And he was distraught about that because it was such a small amount when given the size of the loss of the family. Not only Beverly Garret, who was a fireball community leader here, an activist, a union leader of the government employees, and a mentor to her boys, as well as so many other people, politicians. Her loss alone was far more valuable to the family than that $1 million. But you had 3 others that had been injured here, and they were being told that was all the money there was. My sense told me that there was more money here, that this company was using this shell organization to keep from having to pay people like James. And so we began on the investigation to try to uncover that from the very beginning.
Your sense was due to the fact that you already were investigating the various companies.
We investigate so many companies who use the same playbook. Now they try to refine it and they try to change it up when people pierce the corporate veil, as it were. But nonetheless, I was quite convinced that this company, which was one of the largest trucking companies in America, had effectively attempted to hide the assets so that they would not have to pay people like James Garret and his family the amounts that they owed them.
Right. I see time and time again, there's a lot of lawyers who will settle quickly because they want to get a check. You know, they don't care about the client. The reason we're here today is because we see that he settles these unusual cases. I mean, goes to trial with unusual cases that other lawyers can't or won't, take to trial because it costs too much money, it costs too much time to investigate, and that's what I admire about your firm, Ken.
Well, that is the hallmark of our firm, and I think James would tell you that in the case that he was involved in, we had great pressure to settle the case by the judge, by the lawyers, and it weighed on the families. The families don't know. They're at a loss. They don't want to walk away with zero, and they're being told that there's a chance you can walk away with zero. Fortunately, they believed in me enough that they were willing to go the distance.
When you say great pressure from the judge
was telling them exactly what I said before. There's never been a verdict like that down here. We don't get those kind of verdicts in this court.
Were they saying that to you?
Yes.
Or saying that to the lawyers?
They said it to both the lawyers and myself.
Really?
So it put great pressure on the family to believe me over what they were being told by the judge and by the lawyers, that people are people and they're fundamentally fair. And when they hear about your loss and they hear about the terrible things this company did to hide the assets so they wouldn't have to pay you, that they are going to award you a fair amount of money to compensate your loss. I believe that, and I was right about that. And I thank James and his family for having enough trust in me that they were willing to believe me over all the other voices that were telling them that they ought to take the money and run.
Well, we thank you too, because we like your kind of a lawyer, that fights hard for the client, and I am very sorry for your pain and your loss, and I'm glad you came on the show today. And we wish you the best success, and thank you. James got a terrific story, and I'm glad he got you guys as lawyers. In the other trucking cases that I have produced shows for, I've often seen that the Department of Transportation, if they had a central computer where every driver, like an airline pilot, right, was required to register in the central computer with all their records, we'd have less of these less qualified drivers on the road, wouldn't we?
Oh yes, and Danny can tell you about this. If this one company had a centralized record system as opposed to trying to divide their company up into these small compartments to avoid liability, they would have discovered the problem.
And one thing we learned, and we haven't taught, and I'll try to be quick, is the operation was so shady, and so many documents were being hidden from us. We got a court order and sent a forensic computer examiner to their headquarters up in Michigan, and we downloaded every single thing from their corporate computer system. When we did that, we found over thousands and thousands, reviewing thousands of documents, we found a really important document. 2 years before George Albright was hired by Pro Logistics, he had been rejected by a sister company, Mohawk, I think, or
Carolina Transport.
Carolina Transport. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Owned by the same people. Rejected because he was medically unqualified. And these are all the same issues that were issued in our trial.
Right.
Had they just looked, had they just taken the time to look at their own computer system, they'd have realized just 2 years earlier they'd rejected him. He wasn't qualified.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you for being on the program.
Thank you,
You
Steve.
did a magnificent job with this case, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.